is Tony Reed, and I'm here to talk with you today about how to go about achieving the different goals. There are 4 components associated with achieving items. We're talking about goal setting, motivation, planning, and execution. So we're going to show you how to excel at all 4 of those components today to help you reach your goal. The thing that we want you to take away from this is how to achieve the goals in your life. That's going to be the big takeaway. There are things that have been on your bucket list for decades. We want you to pull it off, and we're going to give you the tools and techniques to make it happen. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. How many of you remember the hair commercial where the guy says, you know, not only am I the CEO, but I'm also a client? With the Empower series, it's kind of the same way. Not only am I a speaker, I actually attend the Empower series presentations. In fact, I was at the one yesterday about social media influencers. So it's a really good series to attend and to learn a lot about, as well as to meet a lot of interesting people. So today we're here to talk about achieving the unbelievable, how to go about thinking like a marathoner. What I've done today is we've literally have taken an 8-hour workshop and we've compressed it down to about an hour. And within the 8-hour workshop, we have 4 15-minute opportunities for people to work on different assignments. So needless to say, if we did those 4 15-minute exercises, we wouldn't have time for any of the content. So I had to make an executive decision to forego basically the assignments. So a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I have a brother who's a year older than I am, and we lived what I would call the typical life. We started off living in the projects, public housing, in the Blue Mar projects in St. Louis. By the time I was 7, I was diagnosed as being a pre-diabetic, and the doctor said I would go on insulin by the time I was a teenager. And that's somewhat scary. A couple of years later, my parents ended up getting a divorce. And so it was tough. My mother was a secretary. We lived with her. I like to say we were always 1 or 2 paychecks away from being homeless. That's how bad things were for us growing up. Went to all black elementary schools until high school. I ended up having the opportunity to go to a prep school in St. Louis, a private white prep school. And it was a lot like the Michael Jackson video Bad. I don't know if you remember the long version of it, but you know, it starts off, he's there at the school with his friends. Then he gets on the bus or the subway and he makes his way, through the city, gets down to where he grew up, and he's kind of surrounded by these different friends. So he was living in 2 different worlds at the same time. And that's exactly what I went through for 4 years, with one exception. Number one, I didn't go to the subway and dance every time after I got home from school. But every day after school, I had to work at the school as a janitor. And then on the weekends, on Friday nights, Saturdays, and Sundays, I worked at a barbecue restaurant as a waiter. So I didn't have time to dance. I was too busy, trying to hustle and trying to work. I was looking over some of my high school yearbook pictures, and there's this one of me over here on the end with the baseball team in my freshman year. But if you notice something kind of different, is you notice everyone has black shoes except me. I have white shoes. Those are Converse All-Star basketball shoes. I was so financially challenged, I had to decide between paying for a baseball glove, a baseball bat, and baseball shoes. I could only get 2 out of the 3. So I ended up getting the glove and getting the bat and just wore tennis shoes. Later on during that season, I had a realization, if I broke my bat, my season was over. So I literally ended up switching over from playing baseball to running track simply because I didn't have the money to continue to play baseball. I graduated in 1973 and went on to college. And while I was in college, I read 2 very influential books that impacted me for the rest of my life. The first book was Nigger by Dick Gregory. A lot of people don't realize it, but Dick Gregory was an All-American collegiate in track and field and cross country. In 1976, Dick Gregory ran from LA to New York City. He averaged 41 miles a day of running. He ended up becoming my distance running role model. I said, you know, if Dick Gregory can do something like this, there's no reason in the world why I can't become a distance runner. I was very fortunate and blessed in that I had the opportunity to interview Dick Gregory a few months before he passed away. And much to my surprise, he took up distance running because he was financially challenged. His family couldn't afford to pay for their heating bill, and he was having to take cold showers. If he ran track, he could take a hot shower. His brother Ron set the high school record for the 1 mile.
But I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Sumner High School and my running.
Very few people realize that distance running played a key role in Dick Gregory's life. Like I said, the reason he ended up running was because he was so poor. Again, he's also from St. Louis. There were times where they couldn't afford to pay the gas bill, and their hot water tank was heated by gas. So when they couldn't afford to pay the gas bill, he was left with taking cold baths. But he also realized that if he ran cross country and track, he would have the opportunity of taking 1 hot shower a day. So he actually got into distance running because, again, he was financially challenged. Another book that I read was called New Aerobics by Dr. Kenneth Cooper. If you've heard of the Cooper Aerobics Center here in Dallas, Dr. Cooper is the one who founded the Aerobics Center. In that book, there was one paragraph where they said diabetics who are insulin dependent could either decrease their insulin intake or go completely off of it if they maintained a fitness program. So in 1976, I set a lifetime goal of averaging running, walking, or crawling just 3 miles a day. And I've kept a running journal since 1979, and this is my running journal. I still log my miles in it. So since 1979, I've run over 45,000 miles. I've averaged those 3 miles a day, and I'll be 65 this year, and I'm still not on insulin. So we're talking about setting long-term, lifelong goals. Thank you. Now, this is a chart of the number of miles that I'd run every year since 1979. The line here at the bottom represents 1,000 miles a year. The green line up there represents 1,200 miles a year. So my goal has always been to run, walk, or crawl somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 miles a year. Now, you see, there were some years that I didn't make it, but I never lost sight of that long-term goal. There's something called life gets in the way, you know, like family and, you know, jobs and what have you. But I always stuck with that long-term goal of maintaining about 3 miles a day. In 1982, I ran my first marathon, 26.2 miles. How many of you have ever run a marathon? Okay. I'll be calling on you today. I'm looking for you to be my backup and support. At the starting line of my very first marathon in 1982 was the Fort Worth Cowtown Marathon. I'm standing there. And the white runners around me start having this conversation, looking at me, pointing at me, going, he's too big to run a marathon. And this whole conversation, these guys, they didn't know me, they didn't know my training program, but they're just looking at me saying, he's too big to do this. What they were doing was they were putting me in a box. And a lot of people will want to put you in a box. They won't know anything about you. They're just going to look at you and go, oh, this person isn't capable of doing this. And the question that you have to continually ask yourself is, do you want to live in the box that other people put you in? So I went ahead and finished the marathon, and I went on to complete marathons in all 50 states, all 7 continents, and to have completed over 100 marathons. Now, to put this in perspective, that's called the marathon hat trick. And there are only 50 people in the world who have ever done all three of those. So if I had lived in a box that these individuals put me in, I never, ever would have been able to achieve those goals. Now, the highlight of my running career occurred, ironically, while not running, but it occurred in 2012. How many of you have heard of the African American Museum in Washington, D.C.? Okay, in 2012, I received a letter from them because they wanted the running clothes that I wore when I ran the marathon on my 7th continent. I became the first black in the world to run marathons on all 7 continents. So my running clothes and other artifacts and the book that's over there is actually with the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. Academically, I'm somewhat of a nerd. I have 2 undergraduate degrees, 2 graduate degrees, and a bunch of professional certifications. While I was in graduate school, I read an article about a gentleman who believed in getting a degree or professional certification about once every 5 or 10 years. And he says what it does is it puts him in a position where he has to learn things and absorb things. I used to have a sign on my desk that says, when you're through learning, you're through. And so my objective was always to be putting myself in a position where I'm learning new things and I'm always challenging myself. Professionally, I was an IT executive and manager for some 25 years. And I like to say I was a trailblazer because in every single job I worked in, as an IT professional from 1977 all the way to the time I left corporate America, I was either the highest ranking black in IT or the highest ranking black in the entire company. And that includes working for companies such as Texas Instruments, Frito-Lay, and even Motel 6. And I like to say as a trailblazer, I always like to focus on the word blaze. That means fire. That means I got burned. I ended up smelling like smoke. But someone had to be the one to kind of, break the ice. I've formed a company called the Caribbean Endurance Challenge. I was able to merge my passions for business and distance running. The Caribbean Endurance Sports Corporation, we formed a race series called the 5 Island Challenge, in which runners run half marathons or half marathons on 5 Caribbean islands: Barbados, Bermuda, Bahamas, Cayman Islands, and Jamaica. So what this series is doing when you look at this is actually putting money in the hands of black countries. No other race series in the world does this, and there are only 2 international race series, and this is the second. So one of the interesting things about being a marathoner is we are what's called a type T personality. How many of you have heard of a type A personality? Okay, as a result of the X Games, social scientists and other people started looking at people who were involved in extreme sports. And they began to realize that there's this thing called a type T personality, which is for thrill-seeking, for risk-taking. I love this definition of it. I am actually 3 out of the 4 of those as far as being, you can be a mental type T or you can be a physical type T. The one I'm not is the sociopath. But as you can tell, of course, I'm an entrepreneur from starting a business. I'm a mental type T because, again, I'm the type of person who believes in challenging myself mentally. And as a physical type T, again, I'm an endurance athlete. Running Times magazine wrote an article about this called The Marathon Mystique, where, again, they started talking about being a mental type T. So the way I like to look at it is hopefully coming out of this, or for that fact, the fact that you were here, you're already a mental type T. You're already a mental marathoner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the different tools and techniques and things associated with being a mental marathoner. Once you become a really focused type T, you'll find that you will meet some very interesting and exciting people as you kind of follow through your particular journey. How many of you have children? Okay, so I also have children. And as a parent, do you ever find yourself stepping back and you're going, how in the world did one child turn out this way other one turns out this way. They were both raised in the same household, and yet they came out to be completely different. And you could even take a look perhaps at your siblings and relatives and try to figure out what made it so that some people were successful and some people, well, weren't as successful. And yet they both had the same opportunities. That has been the biggest question of my life, trying to figure out what the differences were. I say I've run the 45,000 miles. I only ran 10 of those miles listening to music. The rest of it was spent just letting things kind of run through my head. And one of the things I began to realize that in order to be successful, it's more than just being motivated. And I realized that there were 4 components to achieving a goal. Those components are goal setting, being motivated, planning, and then executing that particular goal. And one of my degrees is in math, and I had to put this in the form of a mathematical equation. So bear with me for a second. This equation is multiplicative. And all these components are binary. That's to say it's either 1 or it's 0. Any number multiplied times 0 is what? 0. Okay, so we're going to kind of take this equation and go component by component, and you can see how all this ties together. If a person doesn't know how to set a goal, they achieve absolutely nothing, right? And why don't we use an example of going to college? So if a person sets a goal of going to college, but they're not motivated to wake up every morning to go to their classes, what do they achieve? Nothing. So you could set a really good goal, you can be highly motivated, but if you don't know how to map out what courses you need to take and when you need to take them, you achieve absolutely nothing. In fact, you're kind of like a dog running around in a circle chasing your tail. You expend a lot of energy, but at the end of the day, you achieve nothing. So let's say you could be really good at setting goals, highly motivated, know how to lay out that plan, but the second something goes wrong while you're trying to execute the plan, it comes to a complete stop. And again, you achieve nothing. So in order for you to achieve something, you have to be 100% on setting a goal, being motivated, laying out a plan to get there, and then executing that plan and going through all the obstacles in order to achieve that goal. So let's talk about goal setting. Several of us were having a discussion one day during lunch about the most defining moments in our lives. And for most of us, we realized the defining moments occurred somewhere between the ages of 18 and about 23 or 24. That's when we are invincible. We can do anything and everything, right? I mean, the world is just completely open to you between the ages of 18 and 24. But somewhere during that time period, you suddenly hit that defining moment. For those of us who were in college, it usually came sometime between our sophomore and junior years in college. That's when you go back home, you talk to your friends who didn't go to college, and they are living a fantastic life. They're living in a 1-bedroom apartment, they're driving a beat-up car, and they're eating at fancy restaurants like Red Lobster. You're living in a dorm room with a person who has body odor, you're driving, you're riding your 10-speed bike to and from classes, and you're eating at fancy restaurants like White Castles and McDonald's. So you're looking over at their life and you're thinking, it looks great. What in the world am I doing here in college? One gentleman spent his summer in Galveston scraping stuff off the sides of ships. He said the money was great, but he realized there was more to life than just that, so he went back to college. Another guy spent his summer up in Alaska at a fish processing plant, gutting fish day in and day out. He said the money was great, but he knew there was more to life than that. I was a little slow. My defining moment came when I got kicked out of college. I have 4 degrees, but I got kicked out of college. When I got kicked out of college, I spent a few months trying to wrap my mind around, what did I do wrong? Well, I began to realize that I had a goal of going to college. I didn't have a goal of graduating from college. Different terminology. I had a goal of taking classes, but I didn't have a goal of passing classes. So I began to realize that there's this thing now they call setting a SMART goal. And many of us in corporate America have seen this. It's a goal that is simple or specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Well, what I began to realize was because I didn't give myself a time frame for when I wanted to graduate from college, I was never going to graduate. I want you to think about the items that are on your bucket list, things that you've always wanted to do. They may have been on your bucket list for decades. And the reason you haven't accomplished it is because you haven't given yourself a deadline for when you want to have it done. Maybe you've always wanted to write a book. Maybe you've always wanted to travel to France. Maybe you've always wanted to get a tattoo. I just got my first one 2 years ago. But again, until you give yourself a deadline and a date, it's never going to happen. I was in a little town called Ushuaia, Argentina, at the very tip of Argentina. Someone called my name, and I turned around, and it was this lady, Elizabeth, from my high school in St. Louis. What are the odds of meeting someone from your hometown, and of all places, Ushuaia, Argentina? It's pretty rare. But she introduced me to this gentleman that was next to her, and his name is Dave Hahn. Has anyone ever heard of Dave Hahn? Dave Hahn is a gentleman who has summited Mount Everest 13 times. Not just once, but 13 times. He has summited Mount Everest more times other than the people who work on Mount Everest. But Dave Hahn is also known for rescuing people on Mount Everest. This lady was trapped at 27,300 feet, and Dave, and this is Dave, coordinated a rescue bringing her down Mount Everest. Now, one of the things about Mount Everest is when you die on Mount Everest, they leave your body there. They don't try to recover it. So while you're trying to make it to the summit of Mount Everest, you are literally passing dead bodies along the way to get there. An interesting fact about Mount Everest, 80% of the people who die on Mount Everest don't die going up. They die coming down. Now, the reason is they're so focused on making it to the top, they're burning up and using up all their oxygen. They forget about what the ultimate goal is. The ultimate goal is to live. It's not to reach the goal, but it's to be able to live so you can tell someone that you made it. So they're burning up their oxygen, they lose focus, and they literally end up dying on Mount Everest. 80% of the people die going down. So as you make your goal, keep that in mind. Your objective is always to live and to plan for what happens after you reach that goal. I also believe in setting timely goals. I set short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. So for example, my short-term goal that's less than a year is to run or average about 100 miles a month, or again, roughly about 3 miles a day. I met with my doctor last year for my annual physical, and he looked at me and says, you know what? You need to do 2 things. He says, number 1, you need to lose weight, and number 2, you need to reduce the number of miles that you run. Now, these 2 things are somewhat counterproductive. You're like, oh, wait a minute, you're telling me to run fewer miles but to lose weight at the same time. But my doctor happens to be a marathoner, and he knew that I was a type T personality and that I was going to step up to the challenge. So I ended up changing my diet. I also ended up swimming. So I said, okay, I'm going to change my goal to running 50 miles a month, but swimming at least 5,000 yards a month. My ultimate goal, by the way, is to get up to about 10,000 yards a month. And by the way, I ended up losing the weight. I have a midterm goal, which I kind of talked about earlier with the graph of running between 1,000 and 1,200 miles a year, and a lifetime goal. I never want to go more than 2 consecutive days without at least a 30-minute workout. That's my lifetime goal. Now, this is an exercise that we would typically do. It takes about 15 minutes, where I ask people to identify 3 adventuresome items on their bucket list, and then also to identify at least one of those defining moments in your life. So instead of us doing a 15-minute exercise, I'm just going to ask, does anyone have adventuresome items on their bucket list? And adventuresome, like I said, could be something as simple as getting a tattoo. Does anyone have any adventuresome items on their bucket list? Yes? travel to Spain. Now, I like the fact you were very specific. A lot of people say, well, I want to travel around the world. It's like, well, you know, you're on target. You know you want to go to Spain. Okay. Anyone else?
I'm going to do the 5-island challenge.
You want to do the 5-island challenge? Ah, great. Okay. Anyone else have any adventuresome things? And by the way, you know, you may be thinking this as well, you know, that really isn't adventuresome. I'm a little shy. Believe me, it doesn't matter whether it's adventuresome to someone else. The thing is whether it's adventuresome to you, because you're doing it for you, not for anyone else. What does it mean if you don't have anything on your bucket list? It's a good thing. If you don't have anything on your bucket list, you may be the type of person who just says, hey, this is important. I'm going to start doing this today. I don't have a list. I have a really good friend, and that's the way she operates. She says, if it's important enough for me to put on my bucket list, it's important enough for me to start working on today. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with not having a bucket list. That's almost like being a super type T. Okay, now we're going to talk about motivation. When running a marathon, people always hear about this thing about hitting the dreaded wall. So for those of you who are not runners, the wall is something that occurs at 20 miles. The human body holds roughly 2,000 calories. When you run, the average person burns about 100 calories per mile. So while you're running a marathon, you get to 20 miles, and all of a sudden, your body is totally out of glycogen or calories. And at this point, it becomes a battle between your mind and your body. Your mind, well, your body is saying, I want to quit. There's this nice chair. I just want to sit down and relax. Your mind is screaming and yelling at your body to keep moving. Take that one more step, just one more step. You'll be one more step closer to the finish line. Those of you who have run a marathon, have you experienced this? You can kind of relate to it. It's a completely different beast. In fact, what I tell people is that the halfway point in a marathon is not at 13.1 miles. The halfway point is at 20 miles. Because for the first 20 miles, it's 80% physical and 20% mental. Once you flip over and you deal with the wall, it becomes 80% mental and 20% physical. It's a completely different feeling. And so for me as a running coach, it's always interesting working with new runners, getting them to realize that they have just embarked on something that is going to be totally new for them. And my job as a coach is to get them mentally motivated to deal with that particular wall. So when we're talking about the wall, we're talking about moving outside of your comfort zone. And as I like to say, life begins once you move outside of your comfort zone and you start experiencing things you've never experienced before. When I got my second master's degree, it was in accounting, I decided, of course, that I needed to study for and prepare for the CPA exam. Now, to put this in perspective, when I got kicked out of college, one of the reasons I got kicked out was because I was failing my accounting classes. So now here I am getting a master's degree in the very area that I got kicked out of college for pursuing. And I ended up in the Accounting Honor Society over here at University of Texas at Dallas. I was studying for the CPA exam, and I knew the odds were against me. There were 450,000 CPAs in the country, and only 2,500 were African American. You're looking at 0.5% of all CPAs in this country were African American. I studied for the exam, studied really, really hard, took a practice exam, I scored 18%. I needed to score 75%. Studied even harder, took another practice exam, passed. Went up 2%, got 20%. What I realized is 100% of what I knew only represented 20% of the exam. But I also noticed something very interesting about myself, and this is something that type T individuals will do. We'll go through a period of self-analysis. We'll try to look at, the things that we're doing wrong and what we could do to try to correct it. I realized that every time I would go back to study, I studied the things I already knew, just over and over and over again. Why? Because when I tried to study something I didn't know, I felt like a complete idiot. I literally felt stupid, dumb. I would get depressed, and I would run back over to the stuff I already knew. In order for me to pass that exam, I was going to have to step out of my comfort zone, let go of everything I already knew, and just focus on everything I didn't know. That is a very uncomfortable and it is a very humbling feeling. But that was the only way I was going to pass that exam. I told you that I took up swimming as a way of helping me to lose the weight when I cut back my running miles. I would swim the length of this pool, swim to 25 yards, get to the end and go, swim another 25 yards, hang on to the end of the pool. And I was doing this, and I said, you know what, the only way I'm going to get faster is to learn how to do that little flip turn at the end. So that way, I'm not going to be tempted to hold on to the end, but instead, I'm going to just focus on just swimming back and forth. Well, in order for me to learn to do the flip turn, and I, by the way, just learned this last year, the only way I was going to learn how to do the flip turn was to step way outside of my comfort zone. Why? Because in order to do the flip turn, I was going to have to be underwater, upside down, and holding my breath for a longer period of time than I normally do. This is having to deal with truly getting outside of your comfort zone. So I was able to do it. But again, it took stepping back and going, okay, you got this. And literally taking it step by step. And now I can just do the flip turn like a pro. I like to say I'm one of the cool kids in the swimming pool now. One of the processes that I've used over the years to stay motivated is really, really simple exercise, and that is to take a sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle. On one half, I'll write down everything that will happen if I don't reach that particular goal, if I don't pursue it. On the other side, I'll write down what good things will happen if I do pursue that particular goal, if I do achieve it. So for example, I could say, okay, so what's going to happen if I don't graduate from college? And I'll write down all the different things that'll happen. How many of you have played the game of life? You remember the first decision you make in the game of life is what? Whether to go to college or not. And based off of that, it then goes, these are the different jobs you're eligible for if you went to college, the higher paying jobs. So again, using this example, I would write down all the bad things that would happen if I don't graduate. You know, I'll have to pay off a loan and not have the money in order to pay the loan off. Then what good things will happen if I do graduate from college? All the different positive things. I will hopefully have the money to pursue all these crazy goals and adventuresome goals that I've wanted to do. When I did this back in 1976, looking at how in the world am I going to maintain running and working out for all these years, on what bad things will happen if I don't pursue this, I wrote down one word, and that word was Bill. Bill was a guy that worked at the barbecue restaurant where I had worked at. Over the course of several years, Bill lost one of his eyes due to glaucoma, had his toes amputated, his leg, and ultimately Bill lost his life, all due to complications associated with diabetes. What good things will happen if I'm able to maintain this fitness program? I said, well, hopefully I'll be able to get married. I'll have children. I'll see my children graduate from high school. I'll be able to walk my daughter down the aisle when she gets married. I mean, all these things were things that I said, if I'm able to maintain this 3 miles a day average, I'll be able to complete these particular things. So this is simple and it's really powerful. And what I encourage people to do is when you do this, don't sit there and type it up. Write it up by hand. When you write something by hand, it's a higher level of commitment. And you could keep something like this in your desk drawer at work, and when you're wondering why in the world you're doing something, you can just pull it out and look at it, and it's a reminder of your logic and reasoning behind achieving those particular goals. Other thing I do, I teach the individuals I'm coaching about M&Ms. M&Ms kill ants. M&Ms is an acronym for mantra and music. I always have a mantra, literally for every single marathon that I've run. I've also had a mantra for the different projects that I've worked on, as well as songs associated with all of them. So yes, I'm a geek and I'm a nerd, but I love music. ANTS is an acronym for Automatic Negative Thoughts. These are those things that pop into your head whenever you want to pursue that item on your bucket list or pursue that goal. You hear these little voices. These voices could be those of your parents telling you why you can't do something. Oh, you don't want to learn how to swim because it'll mess up your hair. Or, oh, you don't want to do this because black folks don't pursue this particular thing. Or it could be, your children or your grandchildren say, oh, you're too old to be doing something like that. So, you need to listen out for those negative voices, and those negative voices may end up coming from the people that are closest to you. So, again, acknowledge them, but don't let it live in you. My mantra is hills build character. Every time I see a challenge, I look at it as a character builder. I don't see it as a reason to run away or to stop. When talking with distance runners, a lot of distance runners will have their mantra. And a lot of these mantras, again, are associated with hills, they're associated with pain, and they're associated with endurance. And one of my favorites up here is, of course, your feet are hurting. You're kicking butt. People also can use biblical verses in places of mantras. I've run in many marathons where I've seen the last one, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, literally printed on the back of people's shirts. So that mantra is the thing that you call on when you're in the deepest, darkest part of that particular defining moment. And the mantra and that song are the things that will pull you out. My favorite musician is George Clinton from Parliament Funkadelic. To give you an example of how this works, at the Tupelo, Mississippi Marathon, it started in the wee hours of the morning, and we were told to bring flashlights with us, so I was singing Flashlight by Parliament Funkadelic. The Hartford, Connecticut Marathon, we started there, and we had 5.5 inches of rain during the race, and it continued all throughout the race. You literally couldn't see 150 yards in front of you. The rain was coming down so hard. So I was singing Aqua Boogie, again by Parliament Funkadelic, because he has lyrics in there where he talks about dancing underwater without getting wet. So I envisioned myself running, and the raindrops were parting, and I was perfectly dry throughout the entire race. Now, I didn't realize how many people knew about my little thing as far as music and running goes until on June 23rd, 2014, I woke up and I had a ton of voice messages from people. And they heard this little thing on the radio.
Little known Black history fact. We celebrate Black history every day. This is the story of Tony Reed. He becomes the first Black to compete in a marathon on 7 continents. Wow. Yeah, a Black man. And he warms up the Parliament Funkadelic. Dallas resident Anthony Tony Reed does.
You can imagine waking up and hearing something like that in the morning. So now an exercise that we would typically do at this point in time is you would take one of those items that's on your bucket list, or one of those goals that you wanted to achieve, and you would sit there and try to figure out, okay, so what's the ant? What's that thing that keeps you from achieving it? Why is it still on your bucket list? Then you would identify the M&Ms that you're going to use to kill that particular ant. You're going to have your mantra and your song associated with it. So whenever you hear that little voice come into your head telling you why you can't do something, you pull out your music and you pull out your mantra. Now we're going to talk about planning. Planning is one of the areas that a lot of people have problems in. And this is something that is a workshop in and of itself. But in putting together a plan, I like to give all my different projects little code names, kind of like Mission Impossible, just to kind of make it fun and exciting. Identify all the resources. If you happen to have children, for example, one of your resources is going to be a babysitter. Someone's going to they may have to watch your children while you're pursuing this particular goal. then you're also going to have a backup babysitters. Again, you're talking about putting together contingency plans. You're going to take those negative voices, that you were hearing, and kind of listen to those negative voices, because sometimes those negative voices will actually point out a weakness that you have. And you need to be able to address those particular weaknesses. Also, find someone who has already completed that particular goal. If you can find several people who have completed it, that's great. Have them take a look at the plan that you have laid out. And don't ask them, does this plan look good? More importantly, ask them, is there something missing in this plan? Because it can look really, really good, but things are missing. As a project manager, I can tell you right now about 75% of the projects fail because something was missing when people put their plan together and when they put together their business requirements. So it's not about looking to see if it's right, it's about looking to see what's missing. Another thing that I do with project plans as well as training plans as a certified running coach is every 4 weeks, I literally cut the person's mileage in half to give their body a chance to rest. I encourage people that when you put together your plan, whatever it is, every 4th week, do something different. Take a day trip out of town, go see a movie, go do something you normally don't do, but you need to give yourself a mental and a physical break. When many people participate in a race, these are the types of things that they expect. Restroom, bag drops, all these different things associated with the race. The most interesting race I ever had in my life didn't have any of those things, including a porta potty so you can use a restroom during the race. Now, most people will look at this, turn around and say, there's no way in the world I'll do something like this. I looked at it, again, being a really type T, as an adventure. So the race we're talking about is the Antarctica Marathon. We sailed down there in 2 different ships. This is the one I was in called the Academic Iofi. It could hold about 100 people. There were 100 runners in the other ship. The race director called us down, described the race course to us, and gave us a race number, a pins, a shirt, and sent us on our way. And I walked up to him and said, I need a plan. I need a map. Can you go into more detail? So he pulls his hand-drawn map out of his binder, and he goes into this course in a lot more detail. Now, first of all, because there were going to be no aid stations, we were told we needed to bring 3 bottles of electrolytes with us. Not water, but Gatorade or something, because they had a much lower freezing point. So when the race started, we got in these little boats called Zodiacs, bounced across the water to get to the starting line. At the starting line, there were going to be a flag stuck in the snow where we would leave 2 bottles of water, and we carried 1 bottle with us. Then, when the gun sounded, the first thing we did was we ran through 600 feet of ankle-deep mud. If the mud didn't suck the shoes off of your feet, you then got to this area where there were these birds called skuas, and the birds would try to attack you during the race. So if you can imagine the movie Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, you're running, and there are birds flying all around you trying to attack you. So and by the way, when that happens, what you do is you put your hand up in the air because the bird will attack the highest point thinking it's your head. So you want them to go after your gloved hand rather than your face and eyes. So then he said, you would see a flag stuck in the snow, take a drink out of the first water bottle, put it back down in the snow, and keep on running. Then you get to the foot of Collins Glacier, which is at an 18-degree angle. So this thing is steep. You run up this pure sheet of ice for 3/4 of a mile, and then you run back down. Now, this is so steep that if you slipped on Collins Glacier, you were going to slide all the way down to the bottom, but you're going to knock out the feet of everyone below you. So it starts off as one person sliding down, ends up being a mass of about 8 bodies sliding down that you're trying to avoid. So you run up Collins Glacier, run back over the place where there are the rocks, get the first water bottle out the snow, take a drink of it, put it back down in the snow, fight the birds off, go back through the mud field, get to the starting line, take the second water bottle out the snow, take a drink of it, and carry it with you. Now you continue to run. He said, if I see an airplane, I've gone too far. I need to look for a blue church. This church is about the size of this room. The Pope declared Antarctica Catholic, and just to spite him, the Soviets built a Russian Orthodox church in Antarctica. He said, you look across the street, you see a flag stuck in the snow, take a drink out of the second water bottle you were carrying and put it back down in the snow and continue running. I'll cross over a stream. I'll get to this place called Fur Seal Highway, where seals about waist tall will chase and try to bite you during the race. Turn around, fight the seals off, go back, get the second water bottle out the snow, get back around to the starting line, take a drink out of the third water bottle, put it back down in the snow, and then do all that a second time. Now, if you didn't make it back to that starting line by 3 hours and 40 minutes, they pulled you off the course. If you looked like you couldn't finish the race, they pulled you off the course. If you got injured, if you had a broken bone or something, it was going to cost $15,000 to bring a plane from Argentina back over there to pick you up and take you back over to Argentina. Now, as you know, Antarctica is the only continent where there are no countries. And every time we were in one of these research bases for China, Chile, Uruguay, or Russia, we were technically governed by the laws and rules of those countries, and we got our passports stamped by all 4 countries. So technically speaking, in one marathon, I ran through all those different countries. Now, while we were there, we were very fortunate. There was a film crew there that videotaped some of our experiences. We were having diplomatic problems with the Russians at the time, and because of those diplomatic problems, they were basically trying to stick it to us.
Start line is that wooden post there with a bunch of signs. Otherwise, you would have a preparation you feel inclined to. You keep yourself warm.
So they refused to let us in their buildings. And we had to change clothes underneath their building in sub-freezing temperature with 40-mile-an-hour winds. And then when the race was over, take cold clothes off. You know, you had to take off your wet running clothes and put on ice-cold freezing clothes to get back to the ship. And because there were no restrooms, you had to learn how to run a full marathon without ever going to the restroom. So the training part consisted of how much can I drink to stay hydrated without having to go to the restroom. When you look at this, it looks very desolate. In fact, when you're down in Antarctica, you realize it's like you're looking at a black and white photo when you take out everything that's man-made. Yeah, that's me. I realized that I couldn't wear a face mask, so I had to grow a really thick beard. This is from the top of Collins Glacier. We had some very interesting and adventuresome people on the trip. This man was trying to be the first person in the world to run a marathon in Antarctica wearing shorts. He didn't make it. Now, one of the other interesting things is, we hear about global warming. I've seen pictures from Antarctica last year where you see snow, you don't see it anymore. There's a 71-year-old lady from Slovakia who did a half marathon in Antarctica. There started off being, I think, 140 people, 150 were going to do the marathon, but about 60 were the ones that were able to finish. This is one of the seals that was chasing us. This is another seal that was going from runner to runner trying to bite us. So this is William. He was trying to be the first person in the world to finish a marathon in Antarctica. This was his second attempt. He wasn't able to do it, but he came back the next year and was finally able to reach that goal. So there was a lot of pressure on me to finish the marathon. With about 200 people participating in this race, they didn't know everyone by name, but they knew there was that one black guy. If I didn't finish it, everyone said, "Oh, well, we know, that the one black guy didn't finish." So there's a lot of pressure on me in order to make sure that I finish this marathon. And 8 days later, I ran another marathon in Argentina. So now we would typically have the exercise associated with planning. Again, we're not going to have the time in order to do that. So let's get into execution. This is one of the most challenging parts of this. I've seen people go through again the first 3 items. They set the goal, they're motivated, they laid out their plan, but now the challenge comes with, how in the world can I do this? One of the things I tell people is, number one, once you've laid out your plan, and your plan may be 7,000 or 8,000 steps for all I know, but you focus on the one step that you're on. You have to trust your plan. When I ran the Great Wall of China Marathon, we had to run up and down some 5,000 stairs. I couldn't sit there and from day one think, oh my goodness, I have to run up 5,000 stairs. I only focused on the one step that I was on and just had to have faith and trust that the stair wasn't going to lead me into nowhere. You know, I wasn't going to fall off the face of the earth. And by the way, unbeknownst to me, when I signed up in particular for these 2 marathons, they were ranked in the top 10 toughest marathons in the world, the Antarctica Marathon and the Great Wall of China Marathon. So going up and down 5,000 steps, I only focused on the one step that I was on. Same thing when you put together your plan. Don't focus on something 5 or 6 years down the road. Focus on what you're doing right now. Other thing was having to face fears. There are lots of different acronyms for fears. My acronym is failing to evaluate all realistic solutions. When faced with a problem, my anxiety level may be up to here. But what a type T personality does is a type T personality starts doing brainstorming. If not with themselves, then with other people. They just start throwing out one idea after the other. And they don't sit there and say why that particular idea doesn't work. This is just, I'm just going to come up with as many possible solutions as I can. When I was running a marathon in Kenya, the race director called us together the day before the race and did the exact same thing like the guy did in Antarctica. In fact, it was the same race director. He called us together, described the race course to us, gave us a race number, 4 pins, a shirt, and sent us on our way. And I went to him and said, I need more information. He says, well, I don't have a map. However, the tour guides know the marathon route, so you could get in the Land Rover and they could take you over the course. So this is what we call a double loop course. We were going to run one 13.1 mile circle and then run the same circle twice. So we get in the Land Rover, we start bouncing around this marathon course. It was held inside of a game reserve. We stop and we see 2 rhinos on the side of the road. These rhinos weren't raised in a petting zoo. I mean, this was their territory. And I'm looking at the rhinos, I'm sitting up here going, you know, I'm just going to be dead meat. Because these animals were going to be roaming free during the race. And I asked the guy, so what should we do if we see a rhino in a marathon course? He says, first thing you do is you stop running. You start walking slowly backwards. If the rhino charges you, turn around, run as fast as you can, and start making zigzags. He said rhinos can't turn corners very well. And if you're lucky, they'll lose interest and you can finish the race. We continue running, we go over the next hill and we spot not 1, not 2, but 3 cheetahs. They were going to be roaming free during the race. In fact, they were actually right by the they were right by the directional arrows for the race. Now, I forgot to tell you, during this marathon, the aid stations were guarded by guys with automatic weapons. The rest of the time, you're out there by yourself. So I'm looking at these, you know, I'm looking at the cheetahs, and I asked the guy, I said, okay, I know cheetahs are very good planners. They're very good hunters. In fact, they will set traps. I envision there's a cheetah on the road in front of me. There's one in the tall grass on the left and one in the tall grass on the right. It didn't matter if I zigged or zagged. I was going to be dinner for somebody. So I asked him, I said, how often do they eat? He says, well, a good zebra will last them 3 or 4 days. So we went over the next hill and literally saw 2 zebras fighting. And I went to bed that night praying that the loser was going to be dinner for the cheetahs. But again, as a type T personality, it's all about analyzing the situation and coming up with possible solutions. So I ran the entire marathon next to a guy that was about my age, and I figured I could beat him in a sprint if it came down to it. And I only needed to beat one person in a sprint. So he and I ran together the entire way. Now, kind of putting all these different things together, looking at staying outside of your comfort zone, facing your fears, and going through a period of self-analysis. I was at a banquet in Buenos Aires, totally random where you sat, and I sat next to this lady named Jenny. Jenny and I strike up a conversation, and she goes, her goal is to run a marathon on all 7 continents. There were only 250 people in the world who had ever achieved that particular goal. And I happened to sit next to someone, and that was their goal. But Jenny goes on to say that her other goal is to climb the highest mountain on all 7 continents. And the only one she had not been able to tackle was Mount Everest. Again, like I said, once you start stepping outside of your comfort zone and you start pursuing these goals, you start meeting amazing people all along the way. So Jenny and I spent the evening talking about her trying to reach the summit of Mount Everest. She had 2 prior attempts. She would climb up to a certain altitude, have a medical problem, and go back down. And she fixed the cause of the medical problem. And then she would go back up, went to a higher altitude, had problems, had to come back down. Jenny, by the way, is from, I think she's from Seattle, Washington. We didn't see each other again after this banquet until Jenny was featured in Runner's World for being the first woman in the world to run marathons on all 7 continents and climb the highest mountain on all 7 continents. And I was featured in Runner's World for being the first black in the world to run marathons on all 7 continents. The odds of Jenny and I meeting, super, super remote. But both of us were willing to go outside of our comfort zones to pursue these crazy types of goals. And we ended up meeting. When you're executing your plan, you're going to have to deal with sabotage. Once people know that you're trying to pursue this particular goal, it makes people really, really uncomfortable. So you really need to expect opposition. There are going to be haters. There are going to be all these people that are going to feel threatened because you're doing the one thing that they always wanted to do, but they never stepped out of their comfort zone. So when you step out of your comfort zone to start pursuing these particular things, you represent a threat to them. These people want to keep you in a box. Just like standing at the starting line of my first marathon, they wanted to put me in a box. And you have to make an educated decision about whether or not you want to stay in the box that they put you in. You also have to make a decision about whether or not you want to even announce to people what goal it is that you're trying to pursue. The first time I had a business trip over to Europe, I realized I was going to be over there for a couple of weeks, which meant I was going to have a free weekend. So this is my first trip over to Europe. I'm an opportunist. As soon as they booked the flights, I started looking for a marathon in Europe. So I was going to be in Amsterdam. There were 3 marathons in Europe that particular weekend that I was going to be there. One was in Switzerland. I had this vision of me freezing and dying on this marathon course, and they, find my body 10 years later in a block of ice. Another marathon was in Germany. That one was going to be running through the Black Forest, and I visualized myself getting lost. And with me being black, I would blend in with everything in the Black Forest, and they'd never find me. The other marathon was in Copenhagen. So I ended up booking a round-trip ticket to Copenhagen for that particular weekend, went there, ran the marathon, and this is the medal from that, the Tailwinds Marathon in Copenhagen. By the way, I finished 47th place in the marathon in Copenhagen. There were 47 runners, but I was the first American. I still counted as a top 50 finish. I, by the way, have actually spanned the globe of the range as far as marathoners go. I've won age group and weight division trophies. My marathon personal best is 3 hours and 36 minutes. And for a 200-pound person at my height, you realize that's actually a pretty nice pace to run. My slowest marathon is 7 hours and 28 minutes on the Great Wall of China. And like I said, I have one dead last finish. That was at the Tailwinds Marathon. But anyway, when I made it back to the U.S., I was sharing the fact that I finished this marathon with my staff members. And my boss called me into his office, and he said, listen, people are saying that you scheduled your business trip just so you could run a marathon. And I looked at him and said, wait a minute, you're the one who picked the date and time. You know, it wasn't me. And I knew who the, quote, person was who complained to him about the fact that I ran a marathon while I was over there. It was a person who felt threatened by the fact that I was a runner. So we said, well, whenever you go over there, don't do any running. And I said, wait a minute, it was on my time, it was on the weekend, didn't cost the company any money. But, what you're looking at, you're looking at haters. So, you have to make that decision about whether or not you want to let anyone know that you're going after this particular goal, because, again, they may try to get in your way. So it got to the point with me, even when I would go on a vacation, I never told them what I was doing or where I was going. All they knew is he's off someplace, we have no idea what's going on. So again, the big thing you have to try to decide is whether or not you want to tell anyone that you're pursuing that particular goal. Oh, that didn't turn out quite right. The colors are missing. How many of you have had a vision board? I know what a vision board is. Okay, so I have vision notes, little Post-it notes that would be around my computer terminal or screen. And these are like little hidden messages that no one else knew what they were for. And in fact, if someone would walk into my office, they would see, they said, what's that? I said, don't worry about it. It's just something to remind me of something. So, for example, MS-92 was a little Post-it note I had stuck on my terminal, which was Masters of Science, 1992. My goal was to get that graduate degree in 1992. 12 in 12. When I turned 50, I had a goal of running 12 marathons in 12 months, each one had to be in a different state or country. 12 in 12. 4 by 75. The CPA exam consisted of 4 parts, and you need a score of at least 75 to pass all 4 parts. So that was a reminder to me that instead of going out to lunch with the people that I worked with, my goal was to spend that time studying and focusing. 7 CO7, 7 continents by 2007. And this other little interesting note, no self-sabo, that meant no self-sabotage. I didn't want to kill my particular goal, so I had to keep that as a constant reminder. Oh, now the colors come in. Okay, now we're looking at relaxing and uphill battles. So while people view me as a distance runner, I'm actually a much, much better bicyclist than I am a distance runner. Even though, like I said, my brother and I grew up in the inner city, my brother rode his bicycle from St. Louis, Missouri to Vancouver, Canada, one summer by himself. Back before, I like to say before I had children, I was somewhat of a competitive bicyclist. A lot of people didn't realize that. So I was really good in what they call biathlons, which consisted of bicycling and running. In one particular biathlon for 3 years, I was fighting to get first place. And they had kind of an out and back course. You would first do a 12-mile bike ride, then do a 5K run where you would run for about 1.5 miles, turn around and come back. 2 of us hit the bike finish first. So this is going to be a flat-out 5K run between the 2 of us. On an out and back course, I was in the lead, and as I saw the turnaround point approaching, I started trying to catch my breath because I knew I was going to face the person who's trying to kill me, basically. And true to form, again, in Dick Gregory's book, one of the things he talked about was distance running, it's a mind game. You have enough time to put that spoon in the person's head, stir it up, and really mess with their heads. You can't do that in a 100-meter sprint. So as I approached the turnaround point, I caught my breath, I looked straight at the guy, trying to sound like I was not out of breath, and said, man, it's hot out here, isn't it? Trying to get him thinking about the heat. We hit the turnaround point, and the last 1/4 mile of this race is uphill. You go uphill for a quarter of a mile, then you go downhill for 50 yards. As I'm approaching the bottom of this hill, I dare not turn around and see how close he was behind me. I could hear his breathing. I glanced down. I could see the head of his shadow. And I could hear everything that was going on behind me, and he was looking for every possible weak point. When you're chasing someone, you're looking to see, okay, did their arm swing change? Are they suddenly bobbing their head? You're looking for some sign of weakness. I got to the foot of this hill, dead tired, had nothing left, and I said, just relax. And when you're running long distances, you have to learn how to relax under pressure. So you start off by like noticing, okay, you know, I've been squinting, let me relax my forehead, let me relax my jaws, neck, shoulder. And when you do this often enough, you can just do it just like that and just suddenly relax. We got to the foot of the hill. I said to myself, he may pass me, but I'm going to look relaxed while he does it. So I go up the hill, go down, cross the finish line in first place. And when we were talking, he said, you looked so relaxed going up the hill, I knew I couldn't pass you. And I started worrying about the guy in third place. He said, you had another gear. So when you're struggling, when you're at that lowest point where you're completely out of energy, bear in mind, people are watching you. They're looking at how you handle that stress and pressure. If you blow up, if you lose it, they're going to go in for the kill. So that is when you have to relax. You want to be that person, you know, if a fight breaks out in a room, you want to be the person sitting in the middle of the room drinking a bottle of beer, like going, hey, I'm cool, I got this. Next thing is when you're executing that plan, you may feel like things are spiraling out of control. You always have the option of stopping, coming to a complete stop, and think about where you are and what you're doing. What does they say when you find you're digging yourself in a hole, the first thing you do is you stop digging. So again, when you're under that pressure, you may feel, you know, well, I have to keep moving, I just have to keep going. Exercise your option to stop. I was in a marathon, and my objective was to win my weight division. And in this particular race, they actually wrote your weight on your calf. So now, this was real dangerous when you're in the weight division, because, you know, literally anytime someone would pass me, I look down at their leg, I can let them go. I can let them, you know, they're not in my, you know, we are not in the same category. But about 3 miles into the race, I noticed there was this guy that was like just hanging on my shoulder. And I just kind of turned around and said, hey, you know, we're running the same pace, why don't we go ahead and, you know, run together? And he just grunted. So I'm thinking, okay, what this guy's, his plan is to draft off of me. So I was going to basically, you know, take the lead for the first 26 miles, burning up all my energy. He was conserving roughly 3% of his energy by drafting off of me. We were going to hit 26 miles. He was just going to run right by me because I was just going to be completely spent. So at this point, I started using all the different strategies that distance runners use. You start surging. In other words, you pick the pace up. Then you slow it down. You would run through aid stations and not grab water bottles. So I started doing all these different things to throw this guy off and to try to lose him. And try as I might, he stayed right there. At 20 miles, in the heat of the battle, I came to a complete stop. He didn't have a reason to stop. In fact, it threw him totally off. And I let him get 50 yards in front of me before I picked the race up. Now, the thing about being in the front, he had no idea when I was going to speed up and when I was going to slow down. He was constantly having to react to everything I was doing, but I was the one that was in complete control. At 23 miles, the guy was walking. Surging and slowing down had burnt the guy out. Now, the other thing about when you do things like this, when you pass someone, you just don't barely go past them. Like Dick Gregory said, you blow by them, your objective is to completely demoralize the person so they know they can't come back and catch you. So I blew by the guy and ended up winning my weight division. I have no idea where he ended up. So again, always exercise that option of stopping, rethinking where you are, and then proceed. So to wrap this up, we have the achievement equation with those 4 components: goal setting, motivation, planning, and execution. You have to be really good on all 4 of those in order for you to reach your goal. To me, the best way to look at this is you could be an individual who runs on a treadmill of life, constantly running in place in a controlled environment with a machine moving you along. Or you could take the option of getting out there and seeing the world and experiencing it and dealing with all the different conditions and things that go along with it. But when you do this, you meet some really exciting and fun people along the way. So 1 hour, 11 minutes, right on time. So I want to leave time for questions, by the way, and we have the books available for sale if you're interested. The book that's in the African American Museum is the yellow one. The other book, Running to Leadership, is a 208-page book, which actually goes along with the one-day workshop. Are there any questions? Well, my objective, yes, it was hot. But one of the things, again, that Dick Gregory pointed out in his book is you have the opportunity to plant the seed in the other person's mind. You don't have to believe it. I always would say it's kind of like a person who's president right now. You know, you say it for the other person's benefit, to get them thinking about it. And so that's all I was doing, was just really trying to mess with the guy's head. And by me catching my breath and trying to sound like I wasn't tired or out of breath, he was going to be thinking, you know, this guy has something more, because I'm working it. I'm trying to keep up with this guy. But he's like, hey, aren't you hot? And that evidently played in when I got to the foot of the hill, because he's thinking this guy obviously has another gear. He's just chilling, and I'm up here sweating. So it's a mind game.
So what's the next goal?
Sorry, yes. I was hungry. There's this movie, it's one of those things I was always trying to figure out also. There's this movie called Stay Hungry, where he talked about an animal that has a big belly, you know, that it has just eaten a feast, is just going to lay there. And that's the best time to hunt and kill that particular animal. But an animal who's constantly hungry is always going to be moving around. They're never really going to be satisfied until they finally get that particular meal. I've been a huge history fan. And when I was growing up, especially in middle school, I really got heavily involved in black history. And I looked at where those individuals started versus where they ended up in life. And I said, if they can do that, I don't have any excuse not to achieve my particular goals. If George Washington Carver could, you know, live where he did to grow up to be one of the world's greatest scientists, what excuse do I have if he was, you know, studying by a kerosene lamp? When I went to the high school and I was exposed to a lot of things that the white kids were doing and that they were experiencing, like I was taking a bus to school, and for them it was normal to turn 16 and your parents give you a Mercedes. So that made me hungry. And also, I'll take my hat off to our mother. When our mother was working again, she was a principal's secretary. It just so happens the principal of the high school, and this is an all-black high school, collected postage stamps from all around the world. So my mother got my brother and I interested in collecting postage stamps. And this was in the 1960s. So we would get postage stamps from all over the world, and it didn't cost much to get them. You can get like a bag of 250 stamps for like 50 cents back then. And a lot of people didn't realize that when a country, especially when an African country gained its independence, there were three things that had always changed: its currency, its flag, and its postage stamps. So my brother and I pictured living in the ghetto, learning about all these countries changing around the world as a result of collecting postage stamps. Like the Belgian Congo became, I think, Zaire. So this literally whet our appetites for international travel and for exploring beyond the walls of the ghetto. My brother went on, by the way, to live in Africa for 18 years. He learned to speak Arabic, Portuguese, French, and Swahili all fluently. I ended up kind of following the path that I ended up going. But as a result of collecting stamps, it just really opened up doors for us and opened up our minds. And it's interesting because, again, looking at, especially, for example, looking at our children and other people, it's like, okay, so what's going to be that motivating factor? What's going to be that actually defining moment where they go, you know, I need to do something? You know, our mother believed in letting us hit rock bottom. She did not try to protect us. You know, if you fall, she's not going to try to catch you. It's like, well, you know, learn to pick yourself up. Yes. On the chart that I showed where, you know, the number of miles that I had run each year, at times it was in part due to an injury. We find that running injuries occur because people violate what we call the 3 2s. You went too far, too fast, too soon. I can actually take any running injury and tie it back to violating one of those 3 items. The reason, for example, why I kept getting injured was because I was running too far in a pair of running shoes. Technology for running shoes had changed. Back when I first started running, after you put about 200 miles on a running shoe, you could look at the heel and like it was just completely messed up. They started coming out with new running materials back in the 1990s as such that instead of putting 200 miles on a pair of running shoes, you can now put 400 or 500 miles on a pair. The only problem is the cushioning is dead after about 200 miles. So thanks to my running journal, I started keeping track of the miles I put on running shoes and figured out that's what the problem was. So I just look at an injury as an opportunity to go through and do some self-analysis, go back looking at the journal, trying to figure out, okay, so what did I do that was different? Did I run on a different surface? Did I switch from running on a track to running on concrete? Have I switched from running on a flat course to running on a hilly course? Did I exceed the number of miles that I run by more than 10% every 2 weeks? So there are a lot of different things that I'll look at and sit there and analyze to try to figure out what's going on and then make the appropriate change. That's why one of the reasons I especially try to tell new runners is it's important to keep a journal so you can figure out what's going on, and I'll actually sit down with them and go through their particular journal to try to analyze, you know, what's going on. And you had a question.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, you accomplished a lot, Tony, so what's your next big goal that you're going after?
My next big goal, one, I want to get another tattoo. I need to balance my body out. I have one on this arm. I need to get one on this arm. I also want to work up to the point where I can swim 1,500 yards twice a week. So again, it's funny, when I say what some of my goals are, some people go, well, I can't even swim 1 yard. But it's just gradually increasing it over a period of time. So I had a goal for this last birthday, and now it's for all of my birthdays. For example, is to be able to do my age and push-ups. I'm working now and also being able to do my age and sit-ups. So these are just little things. You know, they don't mean a lot to anyone, but it's something that just kind of, you know, it's a new goal for the year. 50. And I asked him about it, and he says, well, we can't give the children a 0. He said the lowest score that we can give them is a 50. And I told him, I said, what you're teaching my son is if he does absolutely 0, he's going to get half in life what other people who work are going to get. So I said, you need to give him a 0. And he said, I can't do it. And I said, well, my son is smart enough, even at the 3rd grade, to figure out averages. So he says, okay, so I can get a 50 here, I can get 200 or 300s, which is exactly what he was doing, and still pass the class. I said, you need to let him fail. You know, you need to let his hard head hit that floor and for him to pick himself up. So one thing I think with our educational system, I think they're failing our kids by not letting the kids fail.
And then I saw another thing that they're not taking the time, like giving kids explanation. You know, I have a child that has autism, a grandson that has autism, and he has to have different mechanisms to learn, but I found out that they wasn't giving him the visual aids and the things until I started going. So I go up to the school and say, this is not working for him. Don't send him work home if the work is not explaining steps by step how to, you know, do these math problems. So it's just like you said, it's the school system. They work with the ones who are advancing, but the ones that are not catching on or getting it, they're not taking the time to make sure that they know, even just like you said, the basic stuff. It's just sad, but.
How many of you know how to bowl? Bowl, yes. So going all the way through high school, my goal in life was to be a professional bowler. And in fact, one of my first jobs was as a scorekeeper at a professional bowling tournament in St. Louis. Several years ago, I was talking to a little kid, and we were talking about bowling. He goes, yeah, you know, I love bowling. My average is 230. And I'm looking at him, I said, 230? He goes, oh, yeah, I love bowling, you know, yeah, you know. And then it dawned on me, and I said, so, do they have those things in the gutter so you can't throw a gutter ball? He goes, yeah, I love bowling. They were teaching, you know, he didn't know how to fail. The system was literally rigged for him to be successful. When I started bowling, I remember my bowling average in 1963 was exactly 63. A few years later, I made it to the finals of the St. Louis City's Youth Bowling Tournament. But I had to deal with gutters. I had to deal with those failures. The system today is set up so that kids don't have to really deal with failure. If you participate in a sport, everyone gets a trophy. You really don't have to bust your butt. Back then, if you wanted to get a trophy, I don't think in some leagues they didn't even give 2nd and 3rd place. It's like either first or that's it. So you had to learn how to compete if you wanted to take that trophy home. Are there any other questions?
I think that's one, just piggyback with my question, more of a comment. I think that's one thing running does do for you is that it pushes you to do the best that you can do. And so that to pass fast, you know, your failure is always in the back door, but to pull past that and push yourself and reach new heights as far as time and whatever goals you have as far as running.
Yes. And,
I have a question.
yes.
So running is great, and I play football. So my knees are hurting, my back is hurting. I'm just thinking, man, I would walk a marathon possibly, but I'm not going to run.
You can swim.
Well, I was going to ask you because the doctor told you to run less and to lose weight. So you had to kind of pull back on the amount of miles that you're running. But what about, how many people here are not runners? I'm going to raise my hand like I'm proud. Okay.
Yeah.
So with everything you said, there's a lot of transferable mindset tools, but one of the goals for me is to really become more, you know, athletic or active with working out and things like that. What would you suggest people do who are not runners to really stay more engaged in addition to swimming?
I would say walk. I said and I forgot to mention, I also walk. So one day I'll swim. This is my order of events. One day I'll swim, the next day I'll run, the 3rd day I walk. And I'll walk anywhere from 3 to 5 miles. And like I said, I also altered my diet. So I tried to cut out as much sugar as I possibly could, but we were at dinner last night and I was drinking an orange soda. But again, I went through a period of self-analysis. I love going to McDonald's. I love getting a quarter pounder with cheese, medium fries, and a large drink. But going through self-analysis, I realized that really what I liked was the taste of the grease of the burger, the little salt on the fries, and I realized I can get that same thing from getting a cheeseburger and a small fry instead of a quarter pounder and a medium fry. And just those differences alone was about like 300 calories. And 300 calories is what I'll burn in 30 minutes swimming or, walking for an hour or running for 15 minutes. So just tweaking just little things, I was still able to lose the weight. Unfortunately, our body's metabolism slows down about 10% every 10 years. And so we have to make some kind of adjustment between eating less and working out more, or some kind of combination of those two. And it just so happened I had hit that point where the miles I was running and everything just wasn't working for me anymore. And I had to make changes. And again, being a type T personality, it was somewhat of an intellectual challenge to see, can I actually cut my mileage and lose weight at the same time? So just looking for other avenues. It doesn't have to be running, it could be walking, it could be swimming, it could be, if you want, for example, skiing. I have a good friend, in fact, she's big on roller skating. She goes to a city, she packs a roller skate, she always finds a roller skating rink, and you'll see her out there roller skating. So you want to pick something that you enjoy doing. Don't pick something I enjoy doing, but pick something that you enjoy doing and you can do for the rest of your life.
Thank you for watching our Empower Series YouTube video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Remember to hit the subscribe button below, as well as the little button to be notified the next time we upload our video. Until then, stay connected with us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever your social media flavor is. Inspire the world to thrive. See you soon.